Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're traveling to Ethiopia to explore the fascinating history of the Dawuro warriors.
The Dawuro.
You got it! Now you might think you know Ethiopian history, but the Dawuro story, well, it often gets left out.
Oh, I can see why. These warriors were so skilled that even their allies were afraid of them.
Exactly. Their leader, King Kawo Dadu, he fought for his kingdom's independence for years against some serious odds. And we've got some incredible sources to help us dig into all of this, first-hand accounts from people, who were actually there on the front lines. So we're going to find out how the Dawuro, also called the Kulo, really made their mark on Ethiopian history.
I'm ready for some surprises.
Me too! It's a story you won't forget, that's for sure.
It really shows how history isn't just one big story, right?
Yeah.
It's a bunch of different voices all woven together. And today we're focusing on one of those threads that, well, it often gets lost.
That's a great way to put it. It's exactly what we're all about here, finding those lost threads. Okay, so let's start with the basics. The Dawuro, they had this reputation, and it wasn't exactly a friendly one. One source even says, and this is a direct quote, "The Abyssinians fear war between them, therefore they always want to make a peaceful social relationship with them."
Whoa. So they weren't just messing around. This was a group that even potential allies had to be careful with. And it makes you think about Menelik II's chief judge, right, having a Kulo wife. That wasn't just a coincidence, it was strategic. A way to keep them on their good side, maybe.
It definitely makes you think, but then you've got accounts like the one from this Russian general, Alexander Belutovich. He traveled with Menelik II's armies, so he was right there in the thick of it.
Embedded, basically.
Yeah, but his perspective is, well, it's definitely interesting, and he doesn't exactly hold back. In his book, he calls the Dawuro the most brutal tribe, bloodthirsty even, and get this, he even compares them to Turkish Bashi bazooks.
Those guys were infamous.
Yeah.
Notorious for being ruthless and unpredictable.
Exactly. So Belotovich's view, it's something we have to consider carefully. But even with that in mind, his descriptions of how the Dawuro fought, well, they're pretty revealing. Like he mentions this thing they did with captured livestock. They'd either take them, or if they couldn't, they'd just, kill them, leave them right there on the road.
Talk about sending a message. It wasn't just cruelty, though. It was strategic, a way to cut off enemy supplies and just, instill fear.
It makes you wonder what it must have been like to come face to face with these guys on the battlefield. Even Menelik's Amhara troops, supposedly, they were afraid to fight alongside them. Often the Dawuro were put in the rear guard, behind the main force.
Wow, too fierce for their own allies. But honestly, that reputation wasn't just handed to them. The Dawuro, they were effective, and that came from centuries of, being independent, doing things their own way. They developed some pretty unique skills.
And when it comes to effective, we got to talk about King Kawo Dadu. This guy, he held out against Menelik II for years, evading capture even though he was up against a much bigger, more advanced army.
King Kawo Dadu was a symbol of Dawuro resistance. He might not have won in the end, but his defiance, it forced Menelik II to acknowledge their power. Belutovich even mentions his death, fighting for his people. It shows just how dedicated he was and how tough it was for Menelik II to control them.
So then comes his son, Kawo Kanda, who is also known as King Haile Selassie, and he doesn't back down from a challenge, not one bit.
What's really interesting is how Kawo Kanta approached the situation. He and his mother, they strategically retreated up Mount Shoda in Dawuro Loma. It was like a natural fortress.
Smart move. Hard to attack a determined force holed up in the mountains, but I'm guessing it couldn't last forever, could it?
It couldn't. Eventually, some advisors, and prophets too, convinced Kawo Kanta to negotiate. They probably realized they couldn't hold out indefinitely, no matter how strong their position was. And the deal they struck, well, it shows how clever Kawo Kanta was.
Okay, spill the beans. What was the deal? Didn't have to give up being king?
No way. He kept his title, his authority over the Dawuro. In exchange, they joined Menelik II's forces, help him unify and expand Ethiopia. Pretty smart, right? It let the Dawuros keep their independence, but also gave them a chance to become players on a bigger stage.
A win-win, then.
Yeah.
Kawo Kanta protected his people, and Menelik II, well, he got these fierce warriors on his side. But I can't help but wonder what it was like for the Dawuro. I mean, going from fighting Menelik II to fighting with him?
I bet that was a complicated transition. But it just shows how history isn't always clear-cut. Sometimes enemies become allies when it's in their best interest. And in this case, both Menelik II and Kawo Kanta saw the advantages of teaming up.
Right. So now we have the Dawuro, these incredible warriors allied with Menelik II. But they had another skill, something essential for Menelik's expansion. They were amazing boatmen, and this is where their story takes a really interesting turn.
To understand this, we have to go back way before Menelik II, centuries even. The Dawuro, they were navigating the Omo River, traveling all the way to what they call the Salt Sea. Historians think it was probably Lake Turkana, and they'd bring back salt, a vital resource back then.
Wow, so they weren't just warriors, they were skilled navigators and traders too. It makes you wonder, did their control of the salt trade affect how they interacted with other groups? Did their economy work differently? Like, did they even use salt bars as currency, the way other parts of Ethiopia did?
That's a great question, and it really shows how unique the Dawuro were. They had direct access to salt, this incredibly valuable resource. Maybe they didn't need to rely on the salt bar system as much as others, which could have given them a kind of economic independence. It's often overlooked, but it's a key part of understanding the power dynamics and trade networks of that time.
Okay, so we have these skilled warriors, these savvy traders, but how do their boatman skills fit into Menelik II's plan?
Think about it. Menelik II wanted to expand south. But the Omo River, that's a huge obstacle. You need to get your army across somehow. That's where the Dawuro came in. Buletovic actually mentions this in his book, Experienced Boatmen of Ross Wold Georges from Kulo tribe, crossing the Omo. These boatmen, they were most likely the key to letting Menelik's forces move into new territory.
So the Dawuro weren't just fighting next to Menelik, they were literally helping his whole army cross a major river. I never realized how important those boatmen's skills must have been.
Exactly. Without the Dawuro, Menelik II's southern expansion would have been a lot harder. They weren't just soldiers, they were vital support, making sure troops and supplies could move smoothly. They did way more than just fight on the front lines.
It goes to show how their skills, honed over generations, became crucial for Menelik II's success. But that's not the end of their story. Not even close.
Nope, definitely not. Next time, we'll see how this alliance with Menelik II led the Dawuro to one of the most important battles in Ethiopian history, the Battle of Adwa.
The Battle of Adwa is legendary, this moment where Ethiopia stood up to colonialism and won. But what's really fascinating is how important the Dawuro were in that victory. And it wasn't just about numbers. They brought something unique to the fight, something that shows their deep understanding of warfare. So last time we were talking about how the Dawuro, these amazing warriors and bootmen, joined forces with Menelik II. They ended up being crucial for his expansion south.
And that partnership,
Yeah.
well, it took them straight to one of the most important moments in Ethiopian history, the Battle of Adwa.
That's right, the Battle of Adwa. Ethiopia against Italy, and Ethiopia won. It's the huge symbol of resistance against colonialism. But we don't always hear about how important specific groups like the Dawuro were in that victory.
They weren't just there for show, either. Journalist Mese Makuria, he's written a lot about this period, and he emphasizes that the Dawuros sent a whole bunch of warriors to fight alongside Menelik II. And even today, Dawuro elders, they use this term Adel Ole, to talk about the battles like a call to action, a reminder of how intense that fight was.
That's incredible. Those oral histories, they really keep these stories alive. But do we know, how many Dawuro warriors were actually there? Was it a lot?
Oh yeah, it was definitely significant. Historian Fisa Yazikasa, he estimates that over 73,000 Ethiopian soldiers fought at Adwa. And if you look at Alexander Buletovic's records, well over 2,400 of those were from Dawuro, and over 1,600 from Kanta. Kanta was right next to Dawuro, closely allied with them.
Wow, that's a lot more than I thought. It really changes how we see that victory. It wasn't just an Amhara victory, it was a win for all of Ethiopia. Groups like the Dawuro, they stood with everyone else to defend their nation. But there's something else about the Dawuro at Adwa, something I just have to tell you about. It has to do with music.
Ah, yes. The Abilta player. This is where their contribution gets even more interesting. It's not just military might, it's their culture and how well they understood the psychology of warfare.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me about this Abilta player.
So there's this military historian, Zukov. He wrote that a Dawuro musician was playing the Abilta during the battle. The Abilta is like this long, traditional wind instrument, kind of like a flute.
Hold on. A musician right there in the middle of a battle. Why?
It sounds strange now, but it actually goes way back in Ethiopian military tradition. Horns like the Abilta, and drums, they call them negrets. They were used for a lot of things. Coordinating movements, boosting morale, even scaring the enemy.
So this Dawuro musician, he wasn't just providing entertainment, he was part of the strategy. Imagine that. This haunting melody echoing across the battlefield. A reminder of what they were fighting for,
Exactly. And the Dawuro, with their reputation and their culture, I bet they had a huge impact on both sides, their allies and their enemies. It reminds us that winning a battle isn't just about strength. It's about strategy, keeping morale up, and knowing how to use symbols and traditions.
It's amazing how something small, like a musician playing an instrument, can be so important in a big historical event. It shows how well the Dawuro understood warfare. But their culture, it's so much more than just fighting. There's something else I find fascinating, something that tells us a lot about who they were. Their hairstyles.
No, yeah, Dawuro hairstyles were unique. And they weren't just about looking good. They were like a language, a way to communicate things like status, age, even marital status, without saying a word.
Okay, I need details. What did these hairstyles look like?
For Dawuro men, especially the warriors, their hairstyles showed strength and pride. They'd grow their hair long, styled into braids or dreadlocks, sometimes decorated with beads or other ornaments.
I love that. Such a powerful statement. It's like some Native American cultures, where a warrior's hairstyle showed his bravery and what he'd done in battle.
Exactly. It wasn't just fashion. It was a visual representation of their identity, where they fit in the community. And for women, hairstyles were just as important for expressing their roles and what stage of life they were in.
How were women's hairstyles different?
Dawuro women, they mostly used braids, all kinds of styles, and they'd add beads, shells, sometimes even coins. The exact style and decorations would change depending on a woman's age, if she was married, and her social status. Married women, for example, might have different hairstyles than unmarried girls or widows.
Wow. Hairstyles really were like a code full of information. It makes you realize how much we use visual cues to communicate, even without words.
You got it. And in a society like the Dawuro, where oral traditions were so important, well, those visual ways of communicating, they were key for reinforcing social norms and showing individual identity. It's like another part of their cultural tapestry, adding another layer of complexity to how they interacted.
It makes you think about how much we've lost in modern society. We're so focused on words and digital messages that we forget about visual expression sometimes.
It's true. Those Dawuro hairstyles are a reminder that even the little details of how we look can have deep meaning. They help us understand ourselves and others. And they show how important it is to look deeper, to appreciate how diverse cultures really are.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the Dawuro warriors, what stands out to you? What surprised you?
I'm really struck by how they were able to adapt and thrive in so many different situations. Fierce warriors, skilled boatmen, smart traders, and their culture, so rich and expressive. They were independent, resilient, and they left a lasting mark on Ethiopian history.
I couldn't agree more. We've seen how strategic they were, their cultural depth, their skill in battle, and how they navigated all these complex political situations. And they did it all while staying true to who they were.
It reminds us that history is full of these stories waiting to be discovered. And the Dawuro are the perfect example of that.
And their story isn't just about the past, it still matters today. It reminds us to be resilient, to value our heritage, and to look beyond the usual stories we hear.
It shows us that there's always more to learn, more to explore, more to appreciate about human history in all its richness and diversity.
I want to thank you all for coming with us on this incredible journey into the world of the Dawuro warriors. We've learned so much about their battles, their strategic thinking, and their rich culture. Most importantly, we've seen how their story pushes us to look beyond the surface and understand the complexity of human history. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the sources we mentioned today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. We've spent the last 2 deep dives really getting to know the Dawuro warriors, their military skills, their strategic alliances, how rich their culture was. But there's one more part of their story I think we should look at. It shows how well the Dawuro could adapt and thrive, even when things changed around them.
You're talking about what happened after the Battle of Adwa, right? People often think that after they sided with Menelik II, the Dawuro kind of disappeared from Ethiopian history. But that's not what happened at all.
Right. Their story takes another interesting turn. Remember, Menelik II wanted to expand his empire, and the Dawuro, they were perfect for this. They had the military skills, they knew the southern territories, they were in a position to play a big role again.
And it wasn't just about fighting this time. They became part of how those new territories were governed, how they were run. Menelik II, he trusted them. He knew they were loyal and effective, so he gave them real responsibility.
So they went from fighting Menelik II to basically running parts of his empire. That's a huge change. Do we know anything specific about what they did?
Oh, yeah. Historians have found records showing that Dawuro leaders were appointed as governors, regional officials in different parts of the expanding Ethiopian empire. keeping order, collecting taxes, representing the central government. And a lot of these places were remote, with diverse cultures.
That shows how adaptable they were. They went from fighting for their independence to managing this huge multi-ethnic empire. It makes you think, how did they handle all those cultural differences? How did they deal with the power dynamics?
That's a good question. And it shows how complex this period was. The Dawuro, they were once on the outside of the Ethiopian power structure. Now, they were leading the way as the empire grew and solidified. They had to balance their own traditions with this rapidly changing political landscape.
It must have been tough, but also exciting. They were shaping the future of Ethiopia, right alongside Menelik II. But what about the Dawuro people themselves? How did they feel about this transition?
From what we know, it seems like they embraced it. They saw it as a chance to gain influence, to make sure they had a place in Ethiopian society. They kept their cultural identity, but they also helped build the empire.
So they didn't just assimilate, it was about finding a way to live within this new system while holding on to their traditions.
That's it. And that balancing act, it shows how resilient and adaptable they were, how strategic. They knew that to thrive in this new era, they had to be part of the Ethiopian power structure, but they also had to protect their heritage.
Their story is incredible. It challenges this idea that history just moves in one direction. The Dawuro resisted Menelik II, but then they became essential for his success. They helped create the Ethiopia we know today.
It reminds us that history is full of these stories that are just waiting to be found. The Dawuro warriors, they were so much more than just fighters. They were strategists, diplomats, administrators, cultural ambassadors.
It really shows how complex human history is. We need to look for the stories of those who are often ignored or forgotten. Their legacy continues not just in the history books, but in the cultural traditions that are still alive in that region today.
We've seen that their story is full of surprises, challenges, and triumphs. History is never set in stone. It keeps changing as we discover new things and see things from different angles.
I want to thank everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the world of the Dawuro warriors. We've uncovered their military skills, their strategic thinking, and their rich culture. But what's most important, their story challenges us to look deeper and see how complex and diverse human history really is. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to all the sources we talked about today. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.